The pineal gland has become a spiritual buzzword linked to meditation, third eye awakening, or decalcification so that it increases our inner vision. But what if the way we've been taught to see through the third eye is actually distorted? What if some of what we're calling awakening is another layer of false light? In this video, we're going to unravel the deeper mystery behind the all seeing eye, not just the pineal gland, but we're also going to include the optic thalamus, the true inner gateway that ancient mystics called the light of the world. We're exploring the difference between the false light and black light and how this misunderstood force holds the real key to our inner vision. You'll also learn how shadow work clears the emotional distortions and that blocks the ability to truly see, not with your mind, but with your soul. This won't be another surface level third eye teaching. It's about reclaiming your inner light from the inside out, starting with the part of you that's still caught in the illusion. Welcome to Starwell Astrology. My name is Shari, and I'm a Western tropical astrologer with a very special interest in shadow work, esotericism, and astrotheology. If this video resonates with you, please don't forget to subscribe and like. It will help my channel to grow. I do appreciate when you do. As well as I want to mention that I do offer a free weekly shadow work workshop every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you are interested and you'd like to join, just send me an email to starwellastro@gmail.com. So everyone has heard of the third eye. So we've been told that awakening is about seeing more vision, more insights, more wisdom, more light. But what if the idea itself is part of the distortion? Because not all light reveals, some light distracts. And if we don't understand the difference, we might mistake stimulation for truth and perception for wisdom. Most people assume that the eye of Horus represents the third eye, but its deeper meaning is healed perception, the return of wholeness after injury, distortion, and fragmentation. That's the true meaning of it. So the false light isn't about fake experiences. It's about experiences that haven't been integrated through the body, the emotions, and the nervous system. And believe it or not, false light doesn't hide in darkness. It hides in the brightness. It often feels sudden, euphoric, mentally stimulating, and even blissful. It mimics spiritual expansions and skips emotional integration. This is exactly what we've been conditioned to pursue, especially when we're seeking enlightenment. False light gives the sensation of knowing without requiring transformation. And so we gather concepts that sound wise, about them, we speak them out loud, we post them, we believe them, or we try to believe them. But deep down, if our emotional patterns don't shift, if our nervous system stays dysregulated, and if our relationships continue to trigger the same wounds, then it hasn't truly changed us. It's not that spiritual insight is wrong, it's about embodiment. Insight becomes inflation, it expands the spiritual identity, but not the soul. And ultimately, this is about the soul evolving. And so, this is why shadow work and emotional integration are essential. Without them, insights remain a mental concept, not a lived reality. It does not become your direct experience. And if something is not your direct experience, then you don't actually know it. Now, the false light feeds the ego's need to be more, whether it's to be more spiritual, more awakened, more enlightened, but it's still ego, just dressed in a brighter robe. But this is where the black light comes in. And I want to be clear. This isn't meant to take anything away from the spiritual path, especially if you've experienced awakening or an expanded state. But in order to embody truth, we must also be willing to remove what isn't real. So black light does that. It doesn't stimulate. It deconstructs. It reveals truth by removing distortions. Black light is the still point. It's the voice inside of us that yearns for awakening. The still point can only be sensed. And it is the void inside us that is awake, but it's quiet, it's alert, it's present. It's not numb and it's not passive, but there's a stillness. It is a space where there's no distractions, no spiritual excitement, no identity reinforcement, and there's no emotional avoidance. It's just raw presence, the presence and awareness to what is. And in that space, we're able to invite in emotional truth. And we do this not through analysis, not through judgment, but by facing ourselves as we are. It's harder than it sounds because black light offers no image, no vision, and no script. It doesn't give you something to interpret, it strips away the projection. And when projections fall away, truth becomes unavoidable. In other words, you're faced with the staunchness of who you are. And this is why the ancients, their initiation process, took place in darkness, silence, fasting, and solitude. And not because darkness is evil, but because illusion needs light to survive. So to recap, the black light versus the false light. The false light stimulates and inflates. Black light strips away illusion and reveals truth. The false light tries to escape the body. The black light anchors into it. The false light expands the spiritual ego, and the black light dissolves it. So this is why the black light has been guarded, because the real initiation is not found in stimulation, but in discernment. And so to truly understand the all-seeing eye, we must begin not with visions or light, but with the quality of perception itself. So here I want to give a gentle disclaimer. If you're new to these ideas, take what resonates and allow the rest to unfold over time. The path is not about rushing to activate anything. It's about gently cultivating emotional honesty and nervous system regulation, as well as deeper self-awareness. So true awakening is a process of integration, not performance. It happens at the pace your soul is ready for and never before. So let's talk about the all-seeing eye, which is a combination of the pineal gland and the optic thalamus, and why it's important that we know how they work together. Here's what most people never learn. Seeing does not begin with the physical eyes. The physical eyes receive light. They do not interpret it. Interpretation happens inside the brain. Most spiritual teachings fixate on the pineal gland, however you want to pronounce it. But the pineal gland doesn't decide what you see. Instead, the pineal gland regulates rhythm and timing. The pineal gland opens inner states, but the clarity of what appears depends on the filter that receives it. So the pineal gland governs when the system shifts states from sleep to dream to inner imagery, but it does not decide what is true or how reality is interpreted. The real gatekeeper on this is the optic thalamus, because it is the real filter. So the optic thalamus, or the thalamus, filters reality as it comes through the five senses. Before the mind experiences whatever is happening, the optic thalamus receives the signals from the five senses. But here's the thing, it doesn't filter raw sensations alone. It filters sensations and relevance. The thalamus filters reality as it comes through the five senses, but it doesn't pass along raw data. It will prioritize what feels emotionally relevant before the mind even knows what it's seeing. So when there's unresolved emotional charge, the filter isn't neutral. It isn't neutral because it will prioritize based on protection, not accuracy. And it will color perceptions through the lens of past experiences. So what we see may feel real, but that doesn't mean it's a reflection of truth. This is a hard one to grasp because we're very identified with what we believe and what our opinions are. But the truth is that what you see gets filtered through conditioned beliefs, unprocessed emotional wounds, unconscious karmic memories, and so on. That's why two people can experience the same event and walk away with completely different realities. The way we filter reality is rarely conscious. And the optic thalamus, this sacred central organ in the brain, is almost entirely overlooked. And yet, it is what determines how we're perceiving our reality. This knowledge has been deliberately buried, hidden beneath layers of programming that shape our beliefs. So I'll say it again another way. This knowledge has been deliberately buried, hidden beneath layers of programming that has shaped our beliefs and suppressed our emotional truth. And this has also kept our karmic memories unintegrated. And when I say karmic memories, I'm not speaking about things that are obvious. I'm talking about crisis and trauma wounds that we're carrying from our ancestry line, whether this is through slavery or wars that has lived in our bloodline through our ancestral line. And this is carried through in our current lives in a very unconscious way. So the thalamus becomes the emotional lens. And when the lens is clouded, so is our perception of reality. And yet this sacred structure is not really a secret. It's just hidden in plain sight. The all-seeing eye is placed on every US dollar bill, clear as day. But most of us don't understand that it's not just a symbol of power. It's a symbol of perception. Whatever you're perceiving is what your reality becomes. And this is where our power lies. But if our perceptions are distorted based on things that we're conditioned to believe, then we're never going to see in the clarity necessary to overcome and evolve at a soul level. So at a biological level, this points directly to the optic thalamus, and it's a true gateway between sensation, emotions, and interpretations. The ancients encoded this truth in scripture, symbols, and myths. But without emotional healing, the key remains hidden. And most of us don't realize that emotional healing is necessary. It is the key, because it is the key that clears our filters of distortions. So the optic thalamus receives this information that we believe we're seeing through our physical eyes. It doesn't just see it because it becomes filtered. It's also working with our feelings, and then it will ultimately decide what becomes real. This is huge. So our perceptions gets filtered through emotions, memory, and conditioning. Not belief alone, but always the unfelt emotional material behind those beliefs. When emotional wounds remain unconscious, the optic thalamus distorts perceptions to protect the ego's identity. And this is how the false light forms, not through imagination, but through unresolved emotion shaping vision. So, this is why opening the third eye without shadow work doesn't lead to clarity, it leads to amplified distortions. More light may enter, but the lens are still warped. The all seeing eye is not just an organ, it's a state of coherence between the nervous system, our emotions, and our perceptions. When the filter clears, seeing becomes accurate. It's quiet and it's grounded. It's not mystical, it's just true. The pineal gland is important, but it's been over amplified in modern spirituality. We see it everywhere. We see the Vatican pine cone statues, the Eye of Ra, third eye symbolism in sacred art. But there is a deeper truth. The pineal gland doesn't just give you sight, it regulates rhythm and resonance. It tunes the inner environment. But what you actually see, your interpretation of reality, is filtered first through the optic thalamus and then colored by your emotional story. So, this is where the distortion begins. When the pineal gland is stimulated without emotional purification, light pours in, but through cracked lens, and we receive insights or sensations, but without shadow work, the message gets warped. So, why is the pineal gland widely glorified? There are two reasons. One is pure and the other is inverted. The first is that the ancient initiates knew its sacred role as a transducer, a translator between dimensions. They encoded its symbolism to preserve wisdom about the higher centers of perception. But the second reason is that the same symbol was co-opted, used to glorify stimulation over stillness. And this is the deception of the false light. A fixation on the third eye awakening without emotional coherence, without heart alignment, and without inner stillness. True visions is not just the pineal gland, it's a trinity. The pineal gland, the thalamus, and the heart. They must work together in emotional coherence. And this is how light becomes clear, not by adding more, but by removing the distortions. So, to truly harmonize the heart, the left and right hemisphere of the neocortex, our brain, must come into balance first, but balance alone is not enough. They must meet in the center at the still point. The, meaning the left brain, which is the intellectual part of our brain, and the right brain, which is our emotional and intuitive side of our brain. We must find the balance between both. And when we do, we find the still point. This central channel, often found in meditation and also spoken of by the ancient teachings, correspond not just to the spine, but to the midbrain, the limbic system, where the optic thalamus and higher perceptual centers reside. It's not merely a neurological fact, it's a sacred path. And the midbrain is the hidden holy of holies. It's a sacred chamber where perception, memory, and emotions converge. When the hemispheres are balanced and the heart is healed, this center becomes the internal midway back to God. Not through blind belief, but through the embodied stillness, through the quiet coherence between mind and heart. So the optic thalamus is actually the true all-seeing eye. At the center of the skull, there's a bone most have never heard of, and it's called the sphenoid bone, where other cranial bones locks into it. If it shifts, everything compensates. It's shaped like a winged throne. It's also shaped like a butterfly wings, which also corresponds to the process of metamorphosis when we move from a cocoon into a butterfly. But this winged throne is our inner throne, sometimes referred to as the throne of God. So the sphenoid is a container, a chamber, and cradled within and around it is the optic thalamus, the pituitary gland, and the pineal gland. And these three glands are the inner technology that allows us the vision, timing, and interpretation. Vision comes from the optic thalamus, timing comes from the pineal gland, and interpretation from the pituitary gland, all housed within a single sacred space in the middle brain, which is our inner sanctuary. This inner sanctuary is also the Ark of the Covenant. In the ancient text that describes the Ark of the Covenant as an external container is not seen just as a sacred relic. It is really referring to something much deeper. It is referred to as something dangerous, as if it's advanced technology. But from an inner alchemical perspective, its power wasn't about destruction. It was about containment, because power without containment destroys the vessel. And the same is true for the inner arc. If the nervous system is chaotic, and if the emotional truth is suppressed, the arc cannot hold the charge. And what happens is that our perceptions get distorted. And this is why awakening without integration can lead to energetic overwhelm, headaches, headache pressure, disassociation, hallucination, total collapse, and maybe even energetic overwhelm or breakdown. And these symptoms often arise when there's too much current or not enough containment to hold the voltage of our spiritual awakening. It usually means that our inner vessel haven't undergone enough emotional refinement or alchemical healing to safely contain the spiritual charge. So when the all-seeing eye begins to come online without refinement, the system can be destabilized. But when there is sufficient emotional coherence, often found through doing enough shadow work, then the midbrain, where the optic thalamus, pineal gland, and pituitary gland converge, they can function as the inner arc, a stable container for perception and higher awareness. And this is not a flashy state of euphoria. It's quiet and it's neutral and it's grounded. So rather than chasing light, consciousness naturally aligns with stillness. What ancient traditions described as the dark or silent void of potential often symbolized the black light. And this is the true awakening of the all-seeing eye. Because when the vessel is stable, the energy remains coherent and visions become truthful. They're not just mystical. They're clear, embodied, and free from distortions. Now, this is a deep topic, and there's many layers of esoteric interpretations. But I want to talk about one more layer of this inner temple, one more mystery that was encoded through suffering, and that is the crown of thorns. Specifically in the story of Jesus, it's been shown that this crown of thorn that Jesus wore was some sort of punishment. But from an esoteric point of view, it's a rite of passage. It's the symbol of energetic circuitry that wraps around the head. The giant neurons form a literal crown around the brain, and this is what activates during an awakening. This is not just metaphor. This is where physiology, mysticism, and prophecy are woven together. When the optic thalamus is activated through emotional refinement, it gets stabilized in the nervous system, and the crown is no longer just light descending from above, but becomes an inner crucifixion. the burning away of illusion through the spine, the skull, and the silent center of perception. The crown, the one placed on Christ's head, becomes the awakened halo of discernment, not bestowed by others, but earned through devotion, coherence, and the return to emotional truth. So, the crown of thorns worn by Christ is not just a symbol of external suffering, it's a sacred metaphor for inner crucifixion of the ego and the mind. And in astonishing alignment with this mystic image, there is a literal ring of giant neurons in the human brain that wraps around the entire cerebral cortex, mirroring a crown. These giant neurons form a neural loop around the brain's midline, encircling the optic thalamus and the third ventricle, which houses the pineal gland and the pituitary gland. This region is the limbic midbrain, the true holy of holies at the center of the brain, when awakened through deep emotional refinement and spiritual integration, and not just stimulation. These crowning neurons light up like a halo and have a neurological resonance field, sometimes referred to as the golden crown, the arc activation, or the all seeing eye. The crown of thorns wrap the mind, not in punishment, but in neural containment, preparing the vessel to receive the true spiritual voltage. And when the midbrain is purified through emotional alchemy and the optic thalamus is cleared of distortions, the all seeing eye awakens and the crown becomes radiant, not as an escape, but as integration. So once the optic thalamus stabilizes and the crown of thorn begins to light up, something unexpected begins to happen. Reality shifts. I call this the Mandela cascade. It's a glitch. It's not delusion. It's what happens when inner visions become more dominant than external programming. Your timeline will subtly separate. You start to see things that others overlook. Conversations feel like echoes, and symbols rearrange themselves, and life becomes more synchronistic and begin to organize itself in a higher harmonic, not fate, but alignment. So this is the soul fractalizing into a true expression, and the false projections fall away. And the light that once distorted through the cracked lens now becomes coherent. So the Mandela cascade is not the end of the path, it's a signal that the vessel is ready. What comes next is not flashy or euphoric, it's the silent descent of truth, Christ consciousness, not a figure to worship, but a current of coherence that you become. It arrives when your emotional body is clear, when your nervous system is steady, and when your eyes have learned to see without reacting. And when it lands, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to know everything. You just are. You're calm, you're clear, you're stable. Light becomes black light because that's where we have all pure potential. And this is where we're grounded in truth instead of illusions. And this is why deep shadow work is not optional on the path to awakening. It is the sacred preparation, the refining fire that clears the vessel. Without it, we confuse emotional reactivity for institution and false light for divine vision. So shadow work humbles the ego, it purifies the nervous system, and it reclaims the energy trapped in unprocessed wounds. Only then can Christ consciousness really descend, not as a concept, not as performance of a spiritual identity, but as a living frequency anchored in the heart. This is the return of the all-seeing eye, not distorted by projections, but clear, quiet, and sovereign. So Christ consciousness is not what we seek. It is what we become when we've made room for truth to live inside of us. So if this message resonates with you and you feel the call to deepen in your own shadow work, I invite you to join me for our free shadow work workshop every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. And this is where the real work begins. If you're interested in joining me, just send an email to starwellastro@gmail.com. And please don't forget to subscribe and like. Thank you for joining me again, and goodbye.